let's get one thing straight. The reason why we decided to devote last year's TDP conference to sustainability is because we cannot stand sustainability anymore. Or better said, we cannot stand the way this term gets abused nowadays. Sustainability has become a semantic gold dust that surfaces everything and the opposite of everything today. And this is why I asked Yvonne Chouinard, the legend of both environmentalism and outdoor clothes business, to come to Borås and be our keynote speaker. In fact, in his foreword to the book Sustainable Fashion, Why Now?, he says, a few years ago at Patagonia, we banned the use of the word sustainable. Of course, it is a soft ban, as Yvonne explained to us during his keynote, because he thinks that we cannot pretend that any sustainable business or any sustainable fashion exists on this planet. What I'm going to share with you now is therefore a distillation of what we have been developing and discussing at our school around this topic. So first of all, we think that it really would be wrong to want to reduce the topic of sustainability to the environment or ecological system. In fact, we must make an effort to expand our view to encompass three independent but interactively operated systems, to wit, the social systems with all their social and cultural players, such as the economy, science, politics, but also the arts, the personal system, individual system, in which every individual has the capability of holding responsibility, and the ecological or environmental system as the habitat of mankind and all our fellow creatures. The appropriate key for sustainable action is in the interplay of these three systems, which together have the capability of rescuing humanity from an early preordinate extinction. But today the term sustainability stands for the preservation of any system. We are, for instance, understanding sustainable development just as the continuation of our Western development model, which can only be sustained on a basis of constant material growth. And only because we want to preserve our Western notion of development, we have meanwhile begun to understand that we simply must take certain constraints into account, such as our environment and the upholding of such social justice. The three-pillar model of sustainability proposed by John Elkington thus simply describes the periodic trade-offs of our economic actions, but there are no indication as to how we are meant to resolve these conflicts of objectives. And so at the best, such a model of sustainable development can only arrive at compromises, but certainly not at winners. And in the worst case, and currently the most likely case, there is to be one big loser, as humanity. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the midst of a radical transition. Today's economic crisis does not correspond to the recession phase of a normal economic cycle. Rather, we find ourselves today in a profound upheaval of our Western industrial and affluent societies. And this upheaval began slowly, some 30 years ago, with the first oil crisis, and expanded in steps with every crisis. And today we find ourselves in a socially intermediate state in which in which we have long had faith in has collapsed, but that in which we might trust in the future has not yet gained shape or definition. We thus cannot talk about sustainability without understanding what have been the drivers of our Western notion of prosperity. And to do so, we need to first confront the dynamic of the early industrial revolution that actually started with the textile mechanization in the later part of the 18th century. It was by means of this development model, based on standardization, economies of scale, and efficiency-driven mentality, that for the first time ever, the economic performance of humanity, represented by the gross domestic product, began to dramatically grow. The rocket-like growth of the last 2 centuries indicate that at that time, after the Homo sapiens sapiens, a new type of human being was born, the Homo modernicus. Our Homo modernicus is a rationally thinking offspring of the Enlightenment. He's a free and democratic man who shows his solidarity with others and is guided by the values of the French Revolution. He's an ingenious being who created the modern industrial system. He is a pragmatic man who grasps the economic dimensions of reality and knows his way around consumer economy. And finally, this Homo modernicus is also an exuberant man who threw himself into the globalization project with all the exuberance of youth in order to be able to keep up with the exponential trends of economic growth at compound annual growth rates. But he also went beyond his goal of harvesting and correctly managing the profit of the real economy and launched himself into the hazard of the speculative financial markets. According to the general economic knowledge, the economic growth, which has kept up for more than 2 centuries now, is a factor touching on self-supporting processes, which are based on 2 main tenets. With regard to the supply side, growth made it possible to invest in research and development, which produced significant technological innovations until now. And this led to new products and more efficient production processes which in and of themselves reinforce further growth. In the eyes of economists, technology is thus the true driving force of growth. They rely on technological progress to solve the repercussion of any environmental pressure and do not see any incompatibility between economic growth and environmental protection. On the demand side, growth created an extraordinary improvement in the standard of living in the industrial countries and led to the development of our present consumer society, which is itself an important mainspring of growth. For traditional economists, our concept of well-being, as well as the social, civil, and cultural development of society, is therefore inextricably linked to economic growth. It was more than 40 years ago when, in one of his famous speeches, Robert Kennedy questioned the GDP as a suitable indicator of prosperity. And it will come as no surprise that the equation linking economic growth and public happiness has today been repealed, not by moralists or anti-capitalist activists, but by liberal economists such as Lord Richard Layard. There is scientific proof that in economically developed countries, the perception of well-being decreases after the acquisition of a certain level of material wealth linked to economic growth. Furthermore, the most interesting microeconomic index, the Index of Sustainable Economic Welfare, shows that from the 70s onward, the contribution of economic growth to prosperity has declined in all the industrialized countries. Today, economists generally agree that a steadily growing portion of the GDP consists of the repair and maintenance of our societies. Such a portion of our economic growth is leaving prosperity out in the cold. The recently published Stiglitz-Sand report says that one universal metric for measuring prosperity cannot be defined. The well-being and happiness of citizens is a country-specific issue, and furthermore, that new set of metrics should absolutely integrate all social and environmental issues that until now the GDP model does not consider. Some of you might remember that one day before our last Design of Prosperity conference, the British government advisor, Sir Nicholas Stern, published his report about the impact of climate change on GDP. And the results of his report got confirmed by a McKinsey study at the end of January 2009. According to those studies, the cost of climate change would amount to as much as 20% of the global combined GDP if we do not commence immediate countermeasures. Costs for a necessary reduction of greenhouse gases, however, were estimated at approximately only 1 to 2% of the global GDP. For the stimulus of their economy, many countries of the world have and still are budgeting much higher expenditures. Many experts, although, are nurturing serious doubts about the fact that those stimulus packages will take us out of the crisis. And however, those same experts do not have any patent remedy either. We have thus to admit that macroeconomics is still unable to describe the effect of the many and dissimilar nation and economic and political measures on complex and interlinked systems like our global economy. Nor can it predict the reaction time to modifying impulses within such systems. Then that is why we must be very much aware of the fact that 30 years ago, we entered into the adventure of deregulation, liberalization, and globalization with a steering declaration of faith, but without any rudder. Even today, with all our economic stimulus packages, we are still navigating on site. Actually, we should not only question if and how economic growth is really contributing to our well-being today, we should also take a much closer look at the concept of technology as the driving force of growth and progress. On one hand, it is true that technology has already proven many catastrophic predictions wrong. In the past, for example, we thought demographic growth was going to throw us back into the dark ages, but increases in agricultural productivity have managed to solve the problem. Too bad that this same technological solution is also one of the factors that increases environmental pressure and is creating the next generation of problems. The advocates of natural capitalism claim that if technological progress could provide enough free energy by exploiting all forms of renewable resources, then we will have achieved heaven on earth. We would have built a kind of perpetual production machine, a happy, everlasting world fueled by all kinds of renewable resources. It is a world where the economy is in perfect harmony with all ecosystems, a world in tune with all imaginable consumerist lifestyles, and a world in which we no longer need to question neither our economic system nor the quantity of material things that we need for our pursuit of happiness. Let us imagine, just for a second, that this vision can come true. After we will have fixed our actual global economic crisis, before climate change becomes irreversible, before we run out of drinkable water and fossil resources, before we will get the backlash of more than 50% of the world, the population living on less than $1 or $2 a day, before we will have irrevocably lost our natural capital. Let us envision a world of tomorrow in which an endless availability of energy, an unlimited access to resources, and the development of all recycling techniques and cradle-to-cradle technology has become true. I think that even if this were to happen, we will still end up hitting the wall, simply because the infinite growth of things would be unsustainable and uncompatible, not only because it will impinge the quality of our life, but also divert us from the essence of our human endeavor, which is about the construction of the meaning of life. The fact is that we cannot just consider our physical environment. We also need to take into account the psychological, existential dimensions of space and time, of our habitat and of our habits, our space and our time. Our space and our time are also limited, and they are also, in some sense, non-renewable resources. The issue of sustainability certainly implies a technological challenge, but we cannot forget the cultural anthropological concerns of sustainability issue, meaning the existential concern of the people of our world. It is, of course, a concern that keeps people busy in very different ways, also depending on the economic, social, and environmental pressure they are exposed to, and depending on where they live on this planet. But we can generally say that on the other side of our planet, we have new hopes for prosperity and for the achievement of a Western lifestyle, a hope that might collapse due to the world economic crisis. While on this side of our planet, we see the end of the dream of constantly growing material prosperity. This was the dream of Mr. and Mrs. Everyman when they were quite recently still identifying themselves as members of an increasingly wealthy middle class. For them, the Damocles sword of the next energy crisis and the soaring cost of basic foods, their children's education, and of health care has become a serious problem. They do not care about whether prosperity is measured by one index or another. They only notice that the bursting of the speculative bubbles has also left deep holes in their own pockets. They watch wars and climate disasters on television, and they see new waves of migrants floating into their cities. And suddenly they feel as if planet Earth had become as small as their own flat. And everything is somehow interconnected. They have understood that the so-called BRIC countries have awakened and are hoovering up energy, raw materials and jobs by manufacturing cheap products for the whole world. And of course, Mr. and Mrs. Everyman have noticed with their own daily purchasing habits that these cheap products are what have made it possible to more or less uphold their standard of living despite the drop in real income until recently. But their employers' head-count reduction measures showed them very clearly just how much these foreign cheap articles production sites impact the domestic industry. But they also realized how much their jobs depend on those fast-developing country markets too. Thus, the life of Mr. and Mrs. Everyman has changed all of a sudden and quite unexpectedly. And concerns about their standard of living, their pension, and their jobs are added to private crises, which are accelerated by the decline of the traditional family model and the dissolution of obsolete gender roles. In view of the economic, social, and environmental turbulences of our time, our previous lifestyle, aimed at material, ephemerally hedonistic, and irrationally entertaining consumption, can no longer provide us the security that we desperately need today. What was so self-evident until recently now seems remarkably unreasonable. We should thus not be astonished that consumers have become more shopping reluctant. They are less and less impressed by the advertising campaigns and turn their attention increasingly to the quality-price ratio of what they eventually are still ready to buy. That is why they flock to discount shops, into factory outlets of all kinds, or private label retailers like IKEA, Zara, or H&M, which all manage to offer premium quality at discount prices. And their only luxury, it's a private item, a little something that is very special and unique, that is clean and fair, however, very probably handcrafted, or is able to tell the story of its tradition and origin, or because it is truly has the best functional performances and is designed to last forever. No extravagances anymore. After the excesses and exaggeration of the past decades, when they help to keep the hedonistic treadmill in motion, rather like hamsters, people are beginning to discover what I call the sober happiness, or the happy frugality as a new lifestyle. Naturally, consumption still remains associated with the act of reaching for an object of desire. However, our research results clearly show that consumers are no longer fascinated by the ways and means that consumption manifests itself today. More and more people prefer the sober and the moderate to the blatant and hype, the extraordinary dimension of normality to the excesses of extravagancy, the creative and unexpected dimension and reinterpretation of tradition rather than the vernacular folklore. Furthermore, we are detecting among the new designers' communities many signals of that kind of strive for what Lucy Horta named as the aesthetics of ethics. On the past, we knew this changed attitude towards consumption from politicized niche groups. Later, it developed into slow food movement, and then slow life movements, and then slow fashion movements, and more recently, market researcher identifying it as the new market segment as the so-called LOHAS, that refers to people striving for a healthy and sustainable lifestyle. The new thing that was actually recently monitored in Germany in one of the main recent consumer surveys is that today some of the most relevant themes of this change in attitude can be found amongst a steadily increasing number of mainstream consumers in our saturated markets. For the one of you that are skeptical and don't believe the paradigmatic dimension of this deep change in consumer attitude, let me say that at a workshop at Walmart in US, when we were asked to participate last summer to a strategic workshop, the discussion also focused on the topic of frugality, on both the offer and the demand side. And I was very impressed that exactly in the country that was inventing consumerism and creating that typical extra large or super-size me mid-American Walmart consumer, one is ready to touch such a taboo issue. And it is therefore not by chance that Mike Duke, the new Walmart CEO, thinks that we will have a big shift from the purely lowest price competition to the quality-price ratio-driven one. In fact, some months ago, he publicly declared, shoppers are keeping a watchful eye on prices and are less likely than before to stock up on items or to purchase lower-quality throwaway items. This is the new normal. This is not something that is going to change. The new normal is therefore not just a new market trend, it is a new social-cultural force that is starting to stretch across all social classes and across all generations in our Western society. It is as if, after all the hula-baloo of too much, too many, too tempting offer, bargains, point of sale, and advertising messages aiming always and exclusively at our purse while making use of the most extravagant marketing means, we consumers, we people in our Western societies are now asking for a time-out. We all know that consumers have become more mature, that they are more competent and more demanding, but now we also know that they have all of a sudden also become much more critical. They want transparency. They want to look behind things in order to evaluate the consumer goods offer. And this critical attitude of consumers is not directed against consumption per se, but is much more the expression of the consumer's need to develop their own individual viewpoint and position towards the various brands, retailers, and the products that they will eventually be evaluating, choosing, and purchasing. We must not understand that as an abstract, ideological, ethical transformation of consumption, but rather as a substantiation of people's new motivations and values orientation that gets expressed via the act of consumption. It is the logical consequences of a new social and ecological sense of responsibility held by more and more consumers who start to feel part of a we society. Thus, the new consumers connect his purchasing gesture with a sense of responsibility towards society, environment, and their own and their children's future. Only this synthesis between the interests of our economy and those of our civilization will be able to generate growth in the future. As you may already be aware, people are not waiting for macroeconomists and world politicians to fix the problem of our crisis-ridden economies. They want to make sense or to make a difference. There are more and more people that are linking ideas to actions that go towards energy transition, next urbanism, organic food production, and new lifestyles, not as signs of new fashions, but as a new cultural and socio-economic project. Some people are, for instance, organizing themselves in second-hand neighborhood ateliers for the redesign of second-hand garments, or they gather together with a few bottles of wine and pile into a living room loads of their old but still nice clothing and organize so-called swap parties, which seems to be the ultimate shopping experience of green fashionistas. Or they like to buy in those apparel shops where they can bring back their used garments for being recycled. Or even more interesting, where their used clothes that get sold on commission. And this is a very smart case of Filippa K in Sweden that last year opened in its own apparel store, a shop for Filippa K second-hand clothes. By doing so, Filippa Knutsson is stating the high quality and timeless design of her own collections, and at the same time creating a healthy antidote to fast fashion. Today, more and more companies can make good business with good business, also because more and more people share and Twitter information about shops, brands, goods, and services via internet. Or they form consumers' purchasing groups in order to be able to acquire certain authentic, original, ethnic, pure, biological, traditional, or typical products directly from their producers. This is also the reason of the dramatic increase of successful new business based on atelier and workshop production. Unlike industrial manufacturers, these types of producers commit themselves to the making of specific niche products. It would be wrong to regard all these niche suppliers as a direct threat to the industrial mass market, because they will never be able to be a substitute for that. That would be, in a way, a step backward, and perhaps only desirable to a few representatives of the ideas of neo-pauperism. However, with their top quality or very special creations, unique products, and cross-boarding artworks, they represent an inspiration and an ongoing challenge to the industrial mass manufactured range of goods. And this could lead to new consumption scenarios and fascinating forms of symbiosis of class and mass. Seen from an economic point of view, this new generation of niche suppliers will not only become more significant in terms of turnover, they also will become an important motor, an important new engine of employment for our post-industrial societies, especially because their business model is not based on economies of scale. And please, let's not make the mistake to see these new niche suppliers as romantic art and craft facilities without any kind of technology. On the contrary, these new producers, in spite of the fact that they see themselves as enlightened post-industrial artisans and regard their craft also as an art, have become real experts in the employment and use of small, flexible, and high-tech machinery, which has meanwhile become accessible and affordable as do-it-yourself tools. And like every good artist, they know how to sell themselves. They go to fairs that are devoted and frequented by cultural creatives. They make contracts with local retailers and even department stores, which are beginning to open up for such niche products because they have understood the importance of including excellence in their own range of products. But they use the internet and its viral power as their preferred sales and above all communications channel. As Chris Anderson has highlighted in his book The Long Tail, the internet is an integral component of the niche provider's business strategy because it turns masses of markets into a virtual mass market for products that are either innovative, unique, or of excellent quality. Like every marketplace, the World Wide Web is also a place where people not only exchange their knowledge and expertise about what to buy and where to buy, but can also form alliances with others for smarter and more responsible consumption. And since consumers are now closely linked with each other, the darker aspects of the value chain are also very easily revealed. That is why the intrinsic, the inherent quality of products is now back in the news and forces the topic of product quality back into the focus of people's attention. The several scandals which shocked the public opinion activated the amygdala of consumers' brains, that is the very central node in our brain that rathers for danger. And when the amygdala goes shopping, people get also more and more anxious about the high costs of low cost. This need for a greater and real quality of a good, and here I mean also quality with real value, which is not only added value, but intrinsic to the goods and to the brands, is closely linked to another basic human need, namely the need to grow. The need to invent oneself again and again. However, only those things that have meaning to us broaden our horizon and stimulate us to keep on rising above our own personal limits and are the things that we will mostly buy in the future. But such an economy of meaningfulness requires a real social transformation. That is the shift from the actual culture of consumption, focus on the possession of material things, to a new culture of consumption, not only linked to sustainable strategies of production, durability, recycling, waste management, and promotion, but also linked to a new culture of consumption based on the principle of consuming less, but of the best. Product innovation can radically reduce the amount of stuff that humans all over the globe think they would need to achieve our Western notion of well-being. Life cycle assessment can also reduce unsustainability, but all that, though necessary, is not sufficient, because not only the ecology of our planet, but also the ecology of our minds need to be restored to a healthy state. The health the vitality and the resilience that allow the social, the individual, and the environmental ecosystems to flourish need also a new culture of consumption. And I'm talking of a culture because culture plays a central role for such a deep transformation. Culture can in fact constantly create new realities, integrating some and excluding others. And by doing so, its invisible hand leads human cooperation and interaction towards sustainable lifestyles and new understanding of prosperity. That means a culture that is able to convert the paradigm of the quantity of material goods we need into the paradigm of their quality and their sense-making. A culture that establishes a link between our way of consuming and a fair and equitable distribution of wealth on the world. Responsibility. It is at first an individual free choice and an individual stance. But individuals take their own sense of responsibility into any societal subsystem they are part of, like for instance the company they run or work for. And this is what will provoke the next paradigm shift in companies' self-understanding, since they would start to consider themselves not only as part of economy, but also as part of society. And they will then understand their role of co-agents in this ongoing cultural transformation, but also as a strategic task for creating the market of the future. Is this an illusion, a vision too far reaching out? Please never forget that societies change. History has already witnessed cultural and social movements that have dramatically changed the stream of time, like Christianity, the Renaissance, or the Enlightenment. All transformation emerges from that which distinguishes our species from all others, our human mind and spirit. And this is why, in the construction of such an economy of significance and meaningfulness, we should finally start to regard also designers and artists as powerful change agents. Their ability to transform in a thought-provoking way, not just objects and our lifestyles, but also our styles of thoughts, should not just be seen and used as an exclusive commercial and marketing tool like it is unluckily happening today. Their mission is not only that of embellishing more sustainable practices, they can also give us new visions of what a clean, good, fair, and beautiful world could look like. Today, a new generation of artists, designers, and cultural activists are working on the design of a new notion of prosperity. They are many, and they are bold, and they are worldwide connected. They have taken action, and they are not only designing sustainability, but also the venture that can reconcile us with a future we thought we had lost. So, my colleagues and friends, sustainability is not just an inbuilt processor or a process, but it's also a strive, an aspiration, a journey. And let me conclude by saying that entrepreneurs who will be able to design that to be lived new journey will not only be part of that cultural transformation that is already underway, but they will be the leaders of the next and actually the last growth phase of the consumer economy. Since the economy of meaningfulness and significance will be the only economy which is at the same time sustainable and will allow us a truly unlimited growth. Thank you.